Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting on a few more people to come in, and we'll be starting in a minute or so. So good afternoon and a really warm welcome to this very first HDB Potatoes webinar. It's really fantastic to have so many of you join us. This is the first of a series of webinars specifically focused on the potato crop, which will be running throughout the summer. And today we're kicking things off with potato storage, and in particular aspects to do with store cleaning. My name is Laura Bouvet. I'm Knowledge and Innovation Facilitator at AHDB, and I'm responsible for knowledge exchange work in potato storage. So before diving in, just a few housekeeping rules. So in a non-COVID world, we would all be talking to each other and seeing and hearing each other. But for the format of this webinar, you're all on mute and your cameras off. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will be able to see a panel with different tabs. So the one you want to look out for is the questions tab. So please do engage with us by feeding in your questions, and you can do that via this questions box. And similarly, if you have any technical issues or anything like that, please do send those through via this questions box, and my colleague Rachel will be able to pick that up for you. So I know this says 8 o'clock, but we're together for 1 hour on a fairly tight schedule, but we'll do our best to keep to time. And the way this is going to work is that we'll have half an hour or so where you'll be able to hear from our speakers, and then we'll have some time for a more in-depth discussion on the topic of store cleaning. So there are bases and Naroso points available, and you should have been able to put your details through during the registration process. But if for any reason that hasn't worked, please either contact the events manager or get in touch with myself directly, and we'll get that sorted for you. This webinar is being recorded, and the link of the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and will also be available in the follow-up email. You'll get a link as well through that way. And finally, in addition to engaging with us via asking questions and through the questions box, and you can also use our social media channels and use the AHDB Potatoes Twitter handle, as well as those couple of hashtags. So this is what we've got in store for you today. So we'll first be hearing from Adrian Cunnington, Head of Sutton Bridge Crop Storage Research, who will be setting the scene for us in terms of the state of play in spark suppressants availability. Then you'll be hearing from Adrian Bridden, who will give us a bit more detail about CIPC decontamination and these store cleaning guidelines that have been published by the European Potato Value Chain. And finally, you'll be hearing from Jim Saunders, branch manager at Hugh Crane, who will be sharing with us some insights into the health and safety aspects and what to look out for when going through the process of cleaning your stores. And I'm your host for the next hour. So without further ado, the objectives of today's webinar, what we'd like for you to get out of this session is one, to get the latest on the spark suppressants state of play and in potato storage, and what that means for you in terms of options available, and also we'd want you to learn about what to look out for in soil cleaning, whether that's health and safety, CIPC residue levels, because this is a really important issue going into the future, and it's important that we keep you informed with what you need to know about soil cleaning and CIPC residue levels. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Adrian Cunnington, who is head of Southern Bridge Crop Storage Research, and will be giving us some insights into storing without CIPC. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone. As Laura has described, I'm going to give an overview of where we are at the moment with sprout suppression. Some of this information will be known to many of you, but it will also probably have changed a little bit in the last few months. We're still getting changes on a day-by-day basis, so it's important that we keep you up to date, and hopefully if you have any queries, you'll be able to run those through the Q&A later. Okay, so let's look at availability of sprout suppressants at the moment. What sprout suppressants do we have access to right now? Obviously, CIPC approval has now gone, so there will be no further use after this season, and we will have the legacy to manage, and that is something which Adrian will be talking about shortly. If we look forward to 2020 harvest, at the moment, the approval we have is for maleic hydroside, it is for spearmint oil, or it's for ethylene. And those are the three products we currently have approval for, and I'll talk more about other products in a moment. Having some difficulty advancing my slides at the moment, I'm afraid. Okay, so AHDB are currently running a program which is a comprehensive program of storage trials which are taking place on a number of different aspects of sprout suppression. Those trials are ongoing, but I have to say they are delayed by the COVID situation. We haven't been able to go into the stores on schedule, and so we have about a 1.5 month delay at the moment on those trials. So some of that data is going to take time to come through. We've had to push those assessments back, and we're hopeful of having the 7.5 month data from the processing trial available for the next webinar, which is on the 23rd of June. You can see here some of the data from the trials from last year, just to give you a flavour of what we're working on. We have a range of treatments right from untreated through to bioxam plus ethylene on the right hand side here. Maleic hydroside is the treatment which is included in all of those combinations. So we have an MH treatment and an MH-free treatment, and you can see maximum sprout length on the left hand side. In short, the inclusion of maleic hydroside is an important aspect if we're going to get the best out of some of the alternatives which are currently approved. And maleic hydroside is an important element, I feel, for successful sprout suppression going forward this season. So we need to be thinking about that now. and we need to have more information on the use of maleic hydrazide to enable us to get the best out of that chemical. But there is a comprehensive research review on the website now. That's something that we completed last year, and it is demonstrating that on the basis of the current knowledge, we need at least 12 mg per kilo of maleic hydrazide into the potato to get effective sprout control. Okay, so let's look at this pre-storage treatment of maleic hydrazide and just consider that. It's important that we ensure that we get maleic hydrazide uptake for it to be active, and that means getting the chemical on when we've got active growth and foliage, and it also means that we need to think about the impact that maleic hydrazide might have on the crop in other ways. We need to think about its impact on yield. If we go on too early with maleic hydrazide, it can have an adverse effect on yield, but at the same time we need to balance that to enable us to get the uptake that we need for sprout suppression. It's also important that we just think about the skin set situation as well this year. We don't want to keep crops growing on too late because of the fact that we won't have a dipot option this year. So there's a balancing act to do with maleic hydrazide. One thing to say about maleic hydrazide is that there is little impact on fry colour. You can see here from some trials data, again from that trial from last year, that there is very little difference in fry colour score across all of the treatments where maleic hydrazide has been used or where it has been omitted. So I'm coming. Apologies for the problems here. We just need to get back to the previous slide. Okay, so this is the other aspects of availability that I wanted to talk about, and which I mentioned at the start. And the one that you will be particularly interested in, I think, is dimethyl naphthalene, which is also known as DMN. At the moment, DMN does not have approval. The current situation is that Dawnfresh, who are the approval holders for that chemical, are pursuing full approval. They don't think they will have that approval for this autumn, but there is now a proposal for AHDB to apply for emergency use with support from Dawnfresh. It is a developing situation, it's changing by the day, and we do hope to be able to update you further at the next webinar. At this moment, I'm hopeful we will get it for this season at some point, and therefore it will be likely it has a full approval by 2021. The other two products on this slide are orange oil, where we are expecting there to be an approval probably by 2021, primarily for the fresh market. And then 3-decan-2-one is another American product which is coming through, but at this stage we're looking at 2022. We don't think we will have access to that chemical, which in trials has shown good efficacy, but for a couple of years yet. What I do want to show you is the fact that we have evidence from a trip to Germany and Netherlands last year that these alternatives will work in large volume stores. These two photographs were taken at the end of April after about 28 weeks of storage. The variety was Fontan, and the storage was at 7 degrees after maleic hydrazide treatment in the field. And then with the addition of either spearmint oil in the photograph on the left or DMN in the photograph on the right, and the control was comprehensive. So there are ways of making these alternatives work. But what I would say is that they are very volatile chemicals, and therefore they do need different management. We need to be able to keep the chemical in the potatoes. And generally, the way forward for storage is going to be, we are going to need an integrated strategy. It's not just going to be taking out CIPC, plugging in something else. We will need a combination of chemical, we'll need a combination of variety, we'll need a combination of temperature and some store management input as well. One of those factors will be dormancy, and trials are ongoing at Sutton Bridge on dormancy. And you can see here some of the characteristics of a range of varieties on the earliness of sprouting, and this will be something that again is featured in a later webinar. Finally, I'm just going to talk about store management and the way we will need to adapt. When we're store loading, we will need to think about getting stores full to optimize the efficacy. These volatile alternatives very much rely on contact with the potatoes, and therefore if we've got part-filled stores, then the effect is diluted. Slowed speed recirculation, which through the systems we've put in for CIPC, will continue to ensure penetration through the crop, and therefore are important. And extended closure times after application will be a new facet of the use of these chemicals we will need to get used to. We need to keep the stores closed for longer to enable us to get best control. What about other aspects? Then store integrity. This is leakage really. Because the chemicals are very volatile, they need to be well sealed. We need to ensure that we don't have a lot of free air access into the store. And we can run tests on stores to see how well they are sealed. It's called an AP50 test, and that's something we can do from Sutton Bridge. The simple way of doing a leakage test is to do a light test, go in the store, turn out the lights, and you'll get a good idea. And also we may think about topping up insulation to seal stores better. Louvers and doors are probably inadequate on many stores, and we will need to work to improve those over time. This season, and certainly into this period between seasons, is going to be affected by COVID, and there aren't as many engineers available to do some of these upgrades. So we may have to manage with what we've already got in some cases, but certainly input from a DIY perspective to improve store sealing around louvers and doors would be welcome. In older stores, we may also need to check on the panel suitability for mint oil. There was quite a lot of concern about the use of mint oil with styrofoam insulation, but this doesn't appear to be as much of an issue as was first thought. So hopefully contractors will still be able to treat your store. On the store control side, we need to think about modifications to the way we operate the store. So prioritization of ambient versus fridge. That will probably need to alter. We might need to move to more use of closed systems like refrigeration. We need better guidance on flushing protocols and settings. For now, we have the data that we have, but we have CO2 trials ongoing at Sutton Bridge, which we will be reporting on in the coming months. And there are other ways that we can seal stores automatically, such as linking to ethylene generators, so that the ambient louvers, when they open, we don't have the ethylene generators running. Last but not least, costs. It's important to recognize that costs are going to be significant. we have some of these chemicals have significantly higher costs, and therefore we need to generally reduce our reliance on chemical to make sure that the economics stack up. We need to get the best efficacy out of the chemicals, because if we don't, then extra applications will very quickly accumulate unwanted cost, and seasonal pressures could also increase the frequency of use. But I've put some numbers together, which I'll come on to in a moment. Before I do, I just mention that we have a storage networks service running from Sutton Bridge for us to give you free one-to-one visits to individual stores. These are options for your business that we can talk through with you, and this integrated approach to storage I've been talking about will be crucial. Unfortunately, the service was suspended due to COVID, but we are meeting next week with a view to getting the service back up and running. So the number on the top of this slide will be the one to contact, or you can just email Sutton spcsr@ahdb.org.uk. So those costs, roughly £4 for mint oil, £3.50 for ethylene, £2 for maleic hydrazide, and they compare with £1.20 for CIPC, which is now on the way out. So if we put those into a combination of different scenarios, you can see here that costs could, if we just do nothing other than just plug in an alternative such as mint oil on top of maleic hydrazide, we could have some quite high costs if we don't get the management right. If we can reduce those costs a little bit by tempering some of the temperature to reduce the number of applications, maybe use a more cold tolerant variety, a longer dormant variety maybe, then those costs could be reduced significantly. But at this stage, it's very much suck it and see to see how we get on with these chemicals. If we get dimethyl naphthalene, then I would expect the cost to fall somewhere in the middle of those top two, somewhere between £5.50 and £14. So let's say roughly at £10 per tonne for a full season. But that's conditional on that approval. To close, I'll just put this slide up. Please do not apply CIPC at the 2020 store loading, because if you do, then you will not be able to sell your potatoes for all the reasons that Adrian's now going to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, AC, for this run through of suppressant availability. We've had questions coming in, but just to make sure we keep to time, we'll pick those questions up in the Q&A. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you now to Adrian Bridden, crop storage scientist at Sutton Bridge Crop Storage Research. Over to you, AB.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. I usually struggle setting up a projector, so okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pesticide legislation. So it's interesting how we're going from a situation where we're stopped, so where CIPC use is going to be stopped, right, and that causes us all these problems. But the legacy of CIPC is also going to be an issue. That's also something that we're going to have to deal with. Right, and I'm going to try and explain why that is. So as part of a registration process, So you have to. So if you're introducing a pesticide to the market, you have to demonstrate that the use of that pesticide isn't cause any undue risk. So that would be to the environment, to the consumer, to the operator, bystanders, and all that stuff that we read about. A part of that process might also involve the setting of a maximum residue level. So many pesticides have a maximum residue level. They don't have to. So, for example, spearmint oil and ethylene don't. Yet CIPC, maleic hydrazide, and DMN do or will. Right. The purpose of the maximum residue level is not. It's not an indicator of safety. So it's not something that you would use to say, yes, we can use this and eat these potatoes. So it is actually an indicator that a label has been followed. So if you do exactly what it says on the label, you should not get an exceedance of an MRL. Right, so with CIPC and potatoes, the MRL currently is 10 parts per million on potatoes. Right, that's just one MRL for CIPC. There are actually hundreds of others, and there are also MRLs for many or most other commodities. Right, so these are MRLs that I looked up last week, and these are all for CIPC and just various commodities. So you'll see in the middle there, you've got potatoes at 10 parts per million. So that's the MRL currently for the potatoes. Right, we also have an MRL for 0.01 on sweet potatoes and on limes. Right, now what's this about? So this is actually, right, and you'll notice there's an asterisk as well. Right, well, this is actually the LOQ values. So this is the limit of quantification, and it is the lowest concentration of CIPC that can be reliably detected on those commodities. Right, and the asterisk indicates that it is an LOQ MRL. Notice also the difference between the meat, so that farm terrestrial animals, so that'd be something like venison, I guess. That is 0.05. The reason this is higher is because meat has a higher fat content, so that interferes with the analysis. Limes, potatoes, most vegetables have a greater water content, so it makes the analysis more straightforward. Right, so what's the purpose of this? Right, so basically it is to allow appropriate use. So CIPC has been applied to potatoes, and there is a package of data that supports its use on potatoes. So the approval holders demonstrated that the use of CIPC on potatoes didn't unduly increase risk to the consumer. Right, for all other uses, there has been no support, there's been no package, so it hasn't been demonstrated to be able to be applied to sweet potatoes. And therefore, the MRL on sweet potatoes is the lowest concentration of CIPC that can reliably be detected on that commodity. And that is there simply to pick up illegal use, so fraudulent use. So probably the best way to think about that is that the MRL is always the LOQ value, so the limit of quantification, unless a higher value has been justified. Right, so where are we with CIPC? Right, so CIPC approvals have now all been, in Europe, have now all been withdrawn. So January the 8th was the date for that. And we're now in the use up period, and that can vary from one European country to the next. Within the EU, that has to be, the use up period ends on the 8th of October of this year. Right, and at some point, the MRL on potatoes, which is supported by that registration, will go. It will be lost, reflecting that loss of approval. Right, and that is likely to be, we don't know exactly when it will happen, but it is likely to be in the storage season of the current crop. So the 2020 crop, when it goes into store, is likely to come out at a time when the MRL will be something other than 10 parts per million. Right, so that leaves us with potentially with a problem. So CIPC, and whenever I've spoken in the past, I would say CIPC is unusual. It is unusual. So it's a solid at room temperature, and then on top of that, it's barely soluble in water. It has low volatility. It doesn't evaporate very quickly. Also, in potato stores are dark, and hopefully they're pretty dry too. So in potato stores, CIPC persists for relatively long periods. Right, now we've known about that for a while. So anyone that has used CIPC, anyone that's read a CIPC product label will have noticed that seed crops comment. So seed crops of any type must not be stored in buildings or boxes previously treated with CIPC. That's because they become contaminated with CIPC. That contamination can transfer then to the potatoes. Right, also, those of you that have been coming to our events may well have heard Lisa Douglas, a PhD student who was working at the Scottish University's Environmental Research Centre. She published several papers recently demonstrating the persistence of CIPC in concrete in a couple of stores that haven't had a CIPC application for at least 15 years. Right, now while that's interesting, what we don't really know is what impact that has on contamination of potatoes in full stores. Right, so we knew we were going to have that there was potential risk of contamination. So 2 years ago, we started this piece of work. And this is European data. This plot shows, this is from the potato value chain, which is a coalition of potato industries. In the UK, we're represented by the BPTA, the PPA, and the FBSA, as well as the AHDB. So these collated data from stores where CIPC had been discontinued, and we were involved in this also. Right, so the vast majority of the data, so 95% of the samples here, had a residue less than 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. Now to remember, the LOQ value for potatoes is 0.01. So that's still quite a significant exceedance. Right, so this data from the European value chain, this was submitted to the European regulators, so through CTGB to EFSA, and on the basis of that data, we are now anticipating a temporary MRL to take account of the contamination of stores. In the 2018 season, the highest value that we saw was 0.36 milligrams per kilogram, and that was a store where CIPC use had only recently been discontinued. We've continued that work into this season, and this season we've had 10 stores in the program. 2 of those stores were box stores, running at low temperatures, so pre-packed type stores. Both of those stores did not at any stage exceed the LOQ value. And of the 8 bulk stores, so these are ex-processing stores that had CIPC until very recently, so recently switched to ethylene. 4 of these stores didn't exceed the LOQ value, but 4 did. The highest value we saw here, the highest residue value we saw in these stores was 0.07 grams per kilogram. So where comparison is possible, the values that we've been seeing this season are lower than last season, but average storage duration this year has also been a little bit less. Okay, so just to summarize then, tMRL, we're expecting a tMRL to be announced soon, and we expect it to come into force during the next storage season. It is granted on condition that it isn't permanent, and the anticipation is that it will reduce gradually to the LOQ value, so down to 0.01. Right, so this is potential. So the MRL, whether it's temporary or not, is a trading standard. So growers should take care to minimize the risk of an MRL exceedance, and we do this by ensuring that stores are effectively cleaned. Right, there is a requirement on us to submit data each year now while this temporary MRL continues. So we're in a transition phase now, if you like, from MRL at 10 down to the MRL at the LOQ value. Right. The same group that collated the data and submitted the data to the European regulators has also drafted a cleaning protocol for stores. They've issued these 4 documents, and all of these documents are available on the AHDB website. I don't think you're going to need all of them, but there's 2 in particular that you should read, or 2 in particular that you may need. First of all, the text document, so the top one here, cleaning guidelines document. That is actually the protocol for cleaning. And then secondly, there is a registration form here where you can actually document your cleaning activities. So this may become part of trading arrangements between companies, you and your customers. So you may need to provide documentary evidence of cleaning having taken place. Okay, before we do any cleaning, obviously please take into account health and safety, do the appropriate risk assessments. I shan't say any more than that. I'll leave that to Jim, but we can come back to it if you want to. Right then, the principles of cleaning. So first of all, what we're trying to do this season is get everything that is not of the store out of the store. So dust, soil, potatoes, they are all now, if it's in the store, that it will all be contaminated with CIPC, and in future will act as a source of CIPC vapor. So all that material has to come out. So all surfaces need to be clean, but brushing primarily redistributes dust, so better to vacuum with a brush attachment, and be as firm as you possibly can. So on foam, be quite gentle. On wood, concrete, composite panels, the agitation can be quite severe. And when it comes to vacuuming, a good quality hoover, so something with a HEPA filter, and cleaning that filter regularly will help. Right, we need to start at top, so the inside of the roof, and work down. And we're encouraging people not to use water at this stage. Right, most contamination will be in the area of, in a bulk store, in the main duct, the lateral ducts, and in box stores around the air handling units. So these will require particular attention. Anything that can be removed from the store after it's been cleaned can be placed outside, and there with air movement and UV radiation, that will reduce. Can't quite see what's going on. Okay, anything that can be removed should be removed and placed outside. And then when complete, leave the store as open as possible to ventilate the entire structure. And then finally, don't forget bulkers, conveyors, hoppers, buckets, etc. They are also sources of contamination. Okay, there may be a couple of occasions. There is a set of, there will be a set of pictures coming up where you can see. So on some occasions, it will take more than a brush. So here, a scraper or a wire brush will be needed. But this is inside the duct, so lots of contamination over many years here. It's going to be quite an unpleasant task getting that out, but it is an important one. Also, purlins, joists, rafters, etc. All these surfaces will have a horizontal surface also, which will have dust on, which also will need cleaning up. Right, then in summary, a tMRL is expected soon, but it will reduce over the next few years. It should be achievable in the first instance, but it will reduce. Right, growers should minimize the risk of exceeding that MRL by effective cleaning and be safe both inside and outside the store. Thank you.
Thank you very much, AB, for this whistle-stop tour on CIPC decontamination and sharing with us some best practice principles for effective store cleaning. We have had some more questions come in, so we'll keep those in store for the Q&A. So please, if you've had questions from AB's presentation or from AB, please do keep feeding those through. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Jim Saunders, branch manager at Hugh Crane Cleaning Equipment, who will give us a bit more insight into the health and safety aspects of store cleaning. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon to everybody. I know we're running a little bit short of time, so I'll try and move this along fairly swiftly. What I want to do this afternoon is quickly run through the key health and safety messages and some guidelines when carrying out potato store cleaning. Okay, first of all, management of health and safety at work regulations. We'll quickly go through those. The main part before we carry out cleaning is a risk assessment. And using the current guidelines, every employer shall make a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to health and safety of his employees to which they're exposed to while they're at work, and also risks to health and safety of persons not in their employment arising out or in connection of the conduct that they are undertaking. More details of this can be found in the Health and Safety implemented below on risk assessment, a brief guide. So risk. Risk is a high chance or low that somebody will be harmed by a potential hazard when carrying out a cleaning process. So step one, what we try to do is look for hazards and what can cause any harm, decide who may or may not be harmed and how, evaluate the risks and decide whether the existing precautions that you have in place are adequate or whether more should be done to alleviate it. Record your findings, very importantly, and also, once you've done it, to review your assessment and revise if at all necessary. Once we've done a risk assessment, we then carry out a method statement of how we're going to carry out the cleaning task, also referred to as a safe system of work. It's preferred that after the risk assessment has been carried out, if detailed plan of action of how the job to be achieved is taking account of the risk itself. Examples of topics really to look at is equipment you're working at height, entering confined spaces, proper ventilation, also electrical as well. Make sure that anything you're working around, fans or other equipment that has been isolated before you carry out the cleaning task. On the cleaning process, we've got a couple of slides here before and after of a foamed wall. Most importantly, select the correct equipment for the task. Generally, as Adrian has previously said, that rather than brush, that we then use a vacuum cleaner with a brush. That reduces the dust recontaminating another surface. And then when the dust has been collected in the vacuum cleaner, also proper disposal of that as well. Okay, a hazard. A hazard is anything that has potential to cause harm to people and or damage the property or even the environment, especially in this case. A hazard is anything that has potential to cause harm to people and or damage the property or the environment. Example, dust and electricity, working at height, moving plant and equipment, and especially the last two items are the two major causes of fatalities in the UK workplaces and the agricultural premises. Working at height especially, we have a couple of pictures here where people are using cherry pickers for doing the Z purlings and cross beams. Also, scissor lifts can be used. Please take care in these situations. They must be properly assessed. Working at height avoided if possible and only carried out by competent persons using correct equipment. There are some tips here. Working at height regulations 2005, and there's also guidance on the HSE as well. The consequence if you don't carry out these structures is of injury to you and or others, pain and suffering, absence from work, loss of earnings, future employment prospects, effect on a family. They can be life-changing. Another subject quite important when carrying out, especially in very dusty environments, is personal protective equipment. Regulation states 1992 that every employer shall provide suitable personal protection equipment to his employees who may be exposed to risks to their health and safety. Every employee shall use any protective equipment provided to him in accordance with instructions given to him by his employer. We have some examples here, especially when carrying out cleaning of a potato store. A suitable dust mask. There's much conversation about these at the moment, which level of dust mask you should have. Speaking to people in the industry, they feel the most appropriate one in this case will be FFP2 grade. but most importantly, they need to be correctly fitted as well. Working at height, especially beams and also confined spaces, hard hat or bump case. Bump cap would be useful. Suitable gloves as well. Overalls, either ones that have been issued to you, to the staff, or disposable overalls, depending on the areas they're working in. And in some companies, also the use of high visibility workwear so people can see you in operation. Glasses have been worn, but they find, especially when vacuuming dust, that safety goggles that complete surround the eye should be worn. So questions to ask yourself before we carry out the job. From what we already know about cleaning open and confined dusty environments, what might be the main hazards you need to protect yourself against? What PPE may your staff require? What might be the consequences of not wearing the correct PPE? And may there be any difficulties of wearing them in the certain areas, and how we can overcome these? Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Jim, for this quick run through health and safety aspects for store cleaning. If I could ask AB and AC to join us, and then we can get this Q&A session started. So I guess if we go back to the beginning of this session and looking at alternative spark suppressants to CIPC, we've had a question come in about DMN. So if DMN is released for emergency use, how much product would be available in the market, and would it actually be enough? AB, are you? Can I get you to answer that question?
I'm not sure I'm in the best place to answer it, but they're seeking approval, so presumably they have enough on the market to sell. Total volumes, I don't know.
Okay. And we've also, in terms of alternatives, we've had a question coming about MH and whether should growers be doing any MH residue tests, and if so, when would be the best time to do that?
Okay. Residue information is always interesting. When you do that is with MH is actually fairly uninteresting, so it doesn't go very far. So the residue concentration doesn't really change during storage. So when is unimportant, but it certainly would act as a good indicator of how good a job you are doing. As Adrian Covington said, 12 parts per million appears to be around about what you need. More is better.
Okay, and final questions to do with the alternatives. Perhaps one for you, AC, because you talked about how volatile those products were. We've had a question about that. So, say if a grower had a 1,000-ton store, and it typically takes 10 days to 14 days for customers to clear the shed. How is this going to be manageable?
I think it's a case of trying to minimize the time. I'm rather keen to make sure that people don't think that what they do now is necessarily the way forward, because some of these products are going to be different, and therefore there will need to be some adjustment in practices. So obviously, the quicker the store can be unloaded, the better. If it does turn out to be 10 to 14 days, I don't think it's a big deal. I think that there will be sufficient residual efficacy, particularly if you're using something like maleic anhydride. There will be enough to keep control of the situation. But if it became an extended period, and I know some people like to take potatoes out of store each week, a little bit all the time, then the importance of that residual control becomes greater, because some of these volatiles certainly won't hang around and give you that type of control. So there will need to be some changes. We may need to move to slightly smaller stores, particularly if stores are really large, and that was a trend we saw probably 20 years ago, where we were reducing really big stores to half their size, and we might have to go back to doing that type of thing again.
Okay, so I guess we can, we've had some more questions come through about alternatives, fat suppressants and DMN, but we'll pick those up separately, and we can follow that up at the end of the webinar. We've had other questions come in to do with store cleaning, particularly one to do with water. I guess, you know, why are you discouraging the use of water to clean stores? Is there a particular reason why that is not being recommended? And if you could go into a bit more detail about that, AB?
A couple of reasons, really. So first of all, CIPC doesn't dissolve well in water, so it's not an effective solvent for CIPC. Secondly, what it will do is pick up clay particles to which CIPC may be attached and move it into a water course. So that's the main concern. If you have a means of getting rid of the water effectively through an approved method, then using water is fine, but we don't know that it would be better than any other method. My suspicion is it would require a detergent to be really effective.
Okay, we've had another question come in. I think that that one maybe for you, Jim. What is the proper procedure for disposal of contaminated dust from stores once you've carried out cleaning?
It depends where the dust has come from. We've got a few stores at the moment that have already been cleaned, and some of the agronomists have actually said the loose dust on the floor and just on the walls could probably go to the same place where potatoes have been disposed of, or old potatoes have been disposed of in the past. But in certain areas where there is a build-up of CIPC, where the following machines have been put, then that probably may be classed as contaminated dust and material which may need to be disposed of in a different way, which I think we'll in future perhaps webinars we'll have more information on that front.
Okay, and I guess on a similar note, should we be washing our boxes to lower the residue on them? And has there been any tests on whether this actually works? Perhaps AB on Jim, you've got something to comment on that question?
We don't have any evidence that washing works on boxes. We do have evidence that putting the boxes outside will reduce the residue concentration. So lots of air moving around boxes and UV radiation will reduce the residue concentration. Okay.
And then another question we've had that's quite interesting, and if growers do, you know, all the cleaning that's required in the safest way possible, possible, but still exceed a tMRL for CIPC if a sampling is done, would people be in trouble, and what would actually happen to that crop?
It may be a T, but it is an MRL, so it's a trading standard. So it's no different to any other MRL, is my understanding. I think it's unlikely to happen, but with one condition: sampling has to be done really, really carefully. That's always counted, but now, when we're dealing with these very small numbers, it is particularly important that the sampling is done very, very carefully. So 0.01 or 0.02, whatever, wherever we end up at, that is not a lot of CIPC. And just contamination from your hands, from walking through the store to get the sample, will be sufficient.
Thank you very much. I think we'll be probably be closing the Q&A now, as it's 2 o'clock. As we drawing to a close, hopefully everybody who's dialed in, you know, you've all by the end of today's webinar, you're more confident about how to carry out store cleaning, the sort of things that you need to look out for in terms of health and safety. And if I could just have just a very quick take-home messages from each of our speakers. If we start with you, AC, and then AB and Jim.
Yeah, my message would be to seriously consider incorporating maleic hydrazide in your sprout suppression for this coming season. I think that residual control that is available through that chemical is going to be important, particularly if we haven't been able to do all the fine-tuning that we might need to do to stores to get the best out of the alternatives. And inevitably that's going to be the case as a result of some of the restrictions we've had due to COVID.
AB, what would be your take-home messages for people listening today?
Okay, I think because of the way things are changing with CIPC, a lot of people are going to be inclined, perhaps due to due diligence, to do more sampling. But be really careful when you do that, because an exceedance is going to cause you a lot of heartache. So take a lot of care with the sampling, and contact us if you want more information on it or just some help with it.
And Jim, what would be your key home messages today?
Before carrying out any cleaning tasks, please look at the hazards, look at the risks, and please stay safe, everybody.
Great. Well, I guess on behalf of our delegates today, thank you very much, AC, AB, and Jim. It's been really great having that run through and whistle stop tour on sprout suppressants availability and store cleaning. And I guess we can now briefly move on to some resources and support that we do have available. So the EU store cleaning guidelines that AB talked about today are available in the handouts panel that you've got just below the questions box. But they're also available for you to download on the website. So please do have a look at those documents. Doesn't seem to be me. Okay. The potato storage hub on the HCB website is really your go-to portal to get all the latest research information and announcements, and those documents are available on there as well. So we'd really recommend you to have a look at the hub and get all the latest information on there. You can also receive regular updates on announcements and the latest research going on at Sutton Bridge, and you can do that by signing up to the storage bulletin, which a link to do that is available on the web page, the landing page of the storage hub. So all the details are on there. And you've heard from the experts today. Adrian Cunnington and Adrian Bridden are available for storage advice by using the storage advice line, which is free of charge to level payers. So please do make use of that resource. And just a brief reminder, as Adrian Cunnington mentioned, the storage network will soon resume. So if you do want to register your interests for one-to-one store visits, the number is on here, and my colleague Emma will be able to take your details. So just very quickly before you go, a survey page will be available when this webinar is finished, and we'll really value your feedback. So if you've got any further questions, or if you want to hear about other things during those webinars, please do fit them in. A link to the webinar recording will be made available as well in a follow-up email and on our YouTube channel. So for anyone who's come in late, the full recording will be available. And again, if you've got any questions at all, please do get in touch with myself. My details are on there, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. And we do have more storage webinars as well as other webinars available. So next week, if you want to hear about weed management, please tune in. And we'll also have 2 other storage webinars specific to the fresh and the processing market. So we'll go in a bit more detail with the alternatives participants available. I think that's it from us. Apologies if we've run slightly behind schedule. But again, on behalf of our delegates, thank you very much to our speakers and to my colleagues in the back office who've been really helpful with dealing with your questions and any technical issues. So have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you at one of our webinars later this month. Thank you.